when I've looked into this as deeply as possible for my whole life, especially studying myth, because myth is really the basis of understanding life. That's what myths are about. They're attempts to understand life. One of my quotes is, "A dream has the power to overcome the inertia of life." Basically, in my model, any 2 points that exchange information produces a mind. Mm-hmm. So inside your body, you got 100 trillion cells are talking to each other all the time. So they're making mind. Mm-hmm. If you call somebody on a telephone and start talking to them, your 2 points of consciousness exchanging a flow of energy and information. That's what a mind is. Dr. Dan Siegel, who's an expert on mind, says mind is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. Okay, so mind is an embodied, means there has to be something that's channeling or holding or sharing information. Relational, it has to go somewhere, or there's no relationship. If I'm not relating to you, then we don't have a relationship. Okay, so in order for my mind, which is the relationships within me, to exchange with your mind, there has to be a flow of energy and information. Yes. There's a couple of different ways to skin this. And, like I told you at the beginning, these are very deep questions. Okay, so if mind is an embodied and relational process, there has to be some kind of a body to make a mind. There has to be something there, a computer, a phone, potentially anything can be a mind, because even rocks can exchange information. They can exchange infrared energy.
There has to be matter. There has to be matter.
Not necessarily, because I'm a remote viewer, and I can travel in my spirit body, and I can go anywhere you want me to go and tell you what's there. I can hear sounds, I can pick things up, I can look at things, I can feel the dust on the moon, but I'm in a body of light.
Okay, I see where that's flawed,
Okay, so the point is what is material is relative to the vibration that the perceiver is at. A way that I describe this is if I was able to take you and turn you into light and take a copy of your body and put you into a video game. I don't know that many video games, call it Mario Brothers or something. When you were in the video game, all the cars and all the people would seem as real as this table to you.
Yes.
Why? Because you're vibrating at the same relative frequency.
Yes.
So, for example, if I'm working with someone who's on the other side, who's passed over, and they come to me, which they do quite often when I'm working with patients who are suffering a lot of grief, to give me messages, then in my third eye, I'm seeing them as a body of light. And they're conveying information to me, right? So the point I'm making is, are they matter or are they immaterial? Well, then you have to say, well, what is matter? It's light.
Yes.
It's just light entangled in a relationship that stops it from moving at the speed of light. Otherwise, you wouldn't see the table there. It would just disappear because it would be moving at the speed of light. So matter actually ties light up to create a body. So the point I'm making is that when it comes to does a mind have to be material, it always depends on what level you're at, because what I see as material in the astral realm, when I'm moving in my astral body, is immaterial here.
Yes.
You got that?
You're just in a different dimension.
Right. Like, I can't see your thoughts coming and going, but I could follow your brainwaves on electroencephalogram. And the point is that the immaterial thought waves are interacting with your own brain and triggering a material process which we can measure. Okay? So to tie that in, David Bohm's implicate order is the order from which thought emerges at the grand level. Okay, because thoughts can emerge from your body. For example, when your stomach's empty, it sends a message to your head, go eat something. So there you have a physical intelligence, the stomach, communicating with the brain, another physical intelligence. So you could say those two material things share information, and they're part of one mind. So you can say the stomach is like a component that has a mind of its own that's an expert at digesting, and the brain has its own interpretation, and the liver also works with the stomach. So do everything works with each other, right? So there you would say those are physical. You can talk between two computers. These microphones are picking up my voice, but we can't see how it's getting to the camera, okay? So for our perspective, the sound waves are implicate. But when you listen to them, they make the speaker vibrate, they become explicate, which means produced, okay? So in the myth of Shakti and Shiva, she, representing the divine feminine, wants a lover. She wants companionship, and she also wants children. So the act of, because there is nothing but God, right? There is nothing but God, or it's not God. God, by definition, is that for which there is no other. Mm-hmm. So if you say to yourself, what causes the world? It's part of the solar system. What caused the solar system? It's part of a galaxy. Mm-hmm. What caused the galaxy? It's part of a universe. What caused the universe? If you keep going to an impasse where you cannot get further, now you're basically bumping up against God, right? So everything that we call the universe is either God's body or inside God's body, right? So because there is nothing but God, and because God ultimately is unconditional, the only way God can experience itself is to look into itself, and the act of looking into itself creates the condition. You understand?
Yeah.
See, if you're sitting in empty-minded meditation and I say, I want you to look into yourself, the act of looking in creates a condition, because you went from a no-mind state to a looking-in state. This is why myth is so important, because ultimately a myth is a story that tells itself.
Yeah.
Most people can't wrap their head around that.
The myth is something that never happened but is happening all the time.
Exactly. So, if life is a story that tells itself, then you would have to say, who's telling the story? Well, there's only one source of life, that's God. So ultimately, all stories are God dreaming itself into existence. Okay? So if you have no story, then you cannot have consciousness, because consciousness is the flow of energy and information. Okay? So in the story of Shiva and Shakti, God, pure potential, unconditional love, has no way to know itself except to look into itself and dream itself into existence. Why? Because we know God's not thinking itself into existence for a simple reason. Mind is a duality, which is the principle of two. You have to have a subject and an object. You have to have a lover and a beloved, right? To have a relationship, you have to have an I and a thou, okay? But prior to the two, you have the one, and the one is the totality of all that exists, okay? Which has the two nested in it, because you have a positive one and a negative one. You can't have a positive one without a negative one, because to create a positive automatically creates a negative. This is why I give the example. If you dig a 3-foot hole in the ground, right next to you is a 3-foot pile.
Yeah.
So you created a negative, but you also created a positive. And if I say I want a pile of dirt 3 feet high, you think you're making the positive, but don't realize you're creating the negative while you're doing it. Okay? Because the actual truth of God is zero, everything that's created is actually borrowed from zero, And that's why Buddha said the only universal law is impermanence, because everything has to ultimately return back to its ground state, to what it was, zero. Okay? And that process of creation and destruction produces time. Time allows you to have an experience. So if we have zero, neutral at the top, unconditional love, I went into meditation and said to my soul, I want you to connect me to God. And I asked God, if you are unconditional love, which by definition is no conditions, how and why did you create all these conditions?
And?
God said, I create conditions so that I can love myself unconditionally. Because without a condition, how do you love?
Would that also point to answering the question, why is there something and not nothing?
That's the condition.
Yeah.
The condition is anything created because, and the other issue is on that, we use the word nothing, but you cannot understand God because to say how you get something from nothing is an impossibility. God is not nothing, God is no thing.
Yes.
You get it? There's a difference.
Yes. Yes.
It takes no thing to make room for everything. You understand? So God looks into itself and says, I dream Chris into existence. I dream Paul into existence. But in order to do that, I have to have a world to support them. In order to do that, I need a solar system to make life. And in order to do that, I need a galaxy to support it.
Because I can't describe something or I can't understand something without understanding the background that it actually has as well.
Well, you couldn't really have a full description of something. I mean, if you came across some new animal in the woods that you'd never seen before and nobody'd ever seen it before, the first question you'd have to ask is, where did it come from? And so if it was in nature, you'd have to say, well, it's a product of nature. So that would start an investigation. What kind of an animal is it? Is it an amphibious animal like a frog? Well, if it is, then how do these things gestate? You know, you'd have to start an investigation based on the known facts that you could gather. But the point I'm trying to clear up there is people always get confused. How do you get something from nothing? There is no such thing as nothing in God, because God is everything and God is pure potential. You have no thing until you look.
Yes.
And that's exactly what quantum physics says. So we have to speak about God in metaphor, because you can't talk about God with words, because you're then creating the illusion we spoke about earlier, and then you have this illusion of God, and that's what leads to religious wars. My God's bigger than your God, and I'll prove it to you, and I'll kill you, right? So when you get rid of the idea of nothing and say, okay, pure potential is just no thing, it's pure unadulterated potential. You can't say that God's thinking that into existence, because as I said, that's a duality, that's a later stage of development, but we dream when we're unconscious. Man is made in God's likeness, so there's a lot of things about us that are telling us about the nature of our Creator. When we're dreaming, we're not thinking, or we would call it thinking. Like, you have to think to do a thesis paper to get a master's degree. Most people wouldn't turn a dream in and say, I had this dream last night, here's my thesis paper, because there's no thinking involved, and we can't really control the structure of our dreams. They just manifest, right? That's a whole other topic. But so when I've looked into this as deeply as possible for my whole life, especially studying myth, because myth is really the basis of understanding life. That's what myths are about. They're attempts to understand life. They're really like very, very important explanation. Almost all myths address the three key things: birth, life, and death, right? A myth is always telling you something about where you came from, is warning you about proprietaries and improprietaries, who you need to be careful about engaging or you might get killed, what animal you need to be careful of, what you should worship, and what's going to happen when you die, right? Because that's really, those are three things that are very, very hard for people to really understand. So myths come from shaman, they come from musicians, they come from artists, they come from poets largely. All of those have one thing in common. They deal with the unrational.
Does that, sorry, I'm not trying to derail us, but this is so brilliant. Is that also where like what the quadrivium starts to point to as well? Like these are the four important aspects that we should be studying, learning, and mastering?
Well, I think those are really more like principles of creation,
Okay.
such as sound.
Yeah.
Right? That's a principle of creation. Sound forms matter. That's what cymatics is all about. It shows you that sound creates formation. So something that's invisible creates an organizing force for the visible. If you put a bunch of, I have a cymatics machine over there. If you put a bunch of sand on a thin sheet of metal and stroke it with a violin bow, it'll vibrate and it'll create a geometric pattern. Prior to the sound vibrations, the sand or the powder was just random. If you take a bunch of iron filings and throw them on a sheet of paper, they'll be random, but if you put a magnet underneath it, it'll organize them immediately, so you see that the magnetic field has an organizing force. So the first thing I'm trying to point out is that God is pure potential, and it's not no thing. I mean, it's not nothing, it's no thing. This is why in Taoism, at the top of the creative matrix, so to speak, is Wei Wu Wei, or Wu Qi. Wei Wu Wei means action without action. Wu Qi, Wu means not, Qi means life, force, not life. So what creates life is not life, okay? Now, why? Because life is something. Here we are. But behind it is that which is not life. There's a lot of paradoxes. This is why Osho says, if you can't understand a paradox, you'll never understand God. Or if he says, if you can't handle a paradox, you'll never understand God. Because everything about God is paradoxical. Okay, so what I've told you so far is that you have pure potential at the top. You have that for which there is no other. That's zero. In order to have a mind, you have to have a relationship. That's two. But we know everything's here. That's the one. Okay? Shakti, the feminine aspect, the emptiness of God, the no thing, which gives birth to everything. Shakti dreams Shiva into existence. Shiva represents her child, her lover, her husband, and everything else. So she, as the divine feminine, looks into herself, dreams Shiva into existence. Shiva represents the one, which would be the same as the Christian God, the God of everything that is. Okay? Because what's the point of being a God if there's nothing to be a God of? So God, as most people conceive of it, is what most religious gods are, the God of everything. Okay? But Shakti is prior to that because she has to dream Shiva into existence. So that would be the masculine principle, or yang. Okay? Once Shakti dreams Shiva into existence, now you have a duality. Okay? So Shiva represents all the created realm, or Bohm's explicate order. Anything that can be weighed, measured, or known. I know the bottle is here. That's the explicate order. It's something that you can objectively measure. Your body is objective. It's explicate. The universe is the explicate order, the tangible universe. So that's zero positive. So you have zero neutral, zero negative, zero positive. In Christianity, that's Father, at the top, 0 negative, the Holy Ghost, 0 positive, Son, which would be Jesus, or you could say you have potential in the place of the Father, you have energy and information in the place of 0 negative or the Holy Spirit, and you have matter in the place of the Son. So there you see the 3 key components of an electrical circuit. And what we know for sure from the electric universe is that the universe is an electrical process. There's other things involved, but for the most part, 98% of everything in the whole universe is plasma, which is conducting massive amounts of electricity. Okay, so basically what I've just shared in a nutshell is God can only be really understood as no thing that's pure potential, that can only create by looking into itself, because there is nothing but God to create, and without God looking into itself, there is nothing to manifest. Just like quantum physics says, until you look at something, it doesn't technically exist. It's in a wave state, which would be the implicate order, which would be the womb of Shakti. Okay? A practical way to look at this is if you say, okay, like let's say you have a dream of getting married and having a family. Well, dream is in the implicate state. But that dream is an inspiration that is driving you to look for a mate and an opportunity to have children. So the implicate dream manifests itself in the awareness that you're looking for a partner, and to the degree that you're sending that intention out, you're going to come into resonance with someone else that has a similar dream of looking for a husband and having kids, and inevitably you're likely to find someone that shares similar values, because values, according to Ibrahim Karim, determine the level of consciousness at which you access and resonate with. So your values about who makes an ideal partner for you and who would make an ideal mother put you into sympathetic resonance with all the other women in the world who could potentially be your partner, and that resonance draws people together, and that's what causes a magnetic attraction, because when you hold your intention on your dream, you're infusing it with spirit. And so that creates a magnetic force. And I'm not talking like a magnet, I mean a drawing force, because God's ultimately whole. So if there's something that you perceive is missing in your life, but you want to have it in your life, then you end up using desire to manifest will, because will and desire mirror each other. Now, will and desire are really expressions of love. L, life, the L of love stands for life, and nobody lives if they don't have the desire to live.
Yes.
Right? If you don't desire to live, you can kill yourself. And even in nature, certain animals and birds, if they lose their mate, will die because they lose their desire to live without their mate. So L is the desire. So that represents Shakti's womb of emptiness. She's got this desire to be filled, which is classically feminine, right? They want to be filled. O of love is 0, pure potential. VE is the scientific notation for volt electron, which is the electromotive force of the whole universe. And so that stands for will. Because if you want to find your partner, you have to be active in looking for her. You can't just lay in your bed and expect her to fall out of the sky. So desire draws on pure potential. The L of love is desire, draws on pure potential, because you have an intention. Intention, you put potential into tension. That's what a dream is. That's why the first number of my system is 1. What is your dream? Because until you tell me what your dream is, I don't know how to write a program for you, and I don't know how to inspire you to overcome your negative behaviors that got you in trouble, right? So desire draws from potential, which produces will. So love, interestingly, is like a jet engine. The harder it sucks or desires, the harder it blows or wills. You turn the throttle up, you burn more fuel, you spin the fan faster, you accelerate. Okay? The more intensely focused you are on achieving your dream, the more desire you have, the more will you generate. Okay? So God's desire is infinite, and that means God's will is infinite. So if you have infinite desire to create, that means you create infinitely.
Where does the, if this is the paradox, the tension to be held in this paradox where Buddhism says to let go of desire?
Yes.
Is that simply just actually the terminology or like the translation from, say, Pali into English where they use the word desire? Is it incorrect, or is there something?
No. And I've looked into this. Buddha was saying to let go of the desire for things.
Things that are
objects.
impermanent.
I own this car. Because if you identify yourself with things and you externalize yourself into the things around you and you never really know who you are. He wasn't saying to let go of the desire for life. Otherwise there'd be nobody here. Okay? If everybody did that. So what Buddha's saying is to let go of the desire for things that are impermanent.
Yes, which cause suffering.
Which causes suffering. But the desire for love, without love there is no relationship. Because by definition, relationship is the only way God can come to know itself. So God has to create you and me and everybody else, because without the subject-object, without the lover and the beloved, there's no way God can experience itself. So God creates the illusion of individuality so that love can actually have currency, because I can't love you if you're not over there. You see, if I'm in the God state, then I'm just looking at another part of myself, kind of like trying to decide which of my fingers I'm going to love the most. I could name this one Chris and Paul and Susie and Donna or whatever, but I'm really just playing a game with myself, and God's playing a game with itself. It has to. Okay? So Buddha was really saying, be aware of what's permanent and what's impermanent. If you fall in love with your sword and you lose it, then you're going to suffer. If you fall in love with a person and you lose them and you're not able to transcend their physical body, then you're going to lose it and it's going to hurt. If you fall in love with love itself and you're falling in love with life itself, I mean, I shouldn't use the word fall because that's the wrong word, but in other words, those things, you know, my grandmother, for example, has long been dead, but her love lives inside of me and it always will. So when I lost my grandmother's body, I didn't really lose my grandmother, I lost my grandmother's body. But my connection to my grandmother is alive in my heart as the experience of my grandmother. And because my grandmother gave me a lot of love, then my grandmother lives in the love of my own experience of life itself. But you see, if I really believed that when my grandmother died, that was the end of my grandmother, that would create a lot more suffering than if I just believed my grandmother made a dimension shift from a physical body to a light body, and that my grandmother lives inside of me. Then I don't really have to suffer. I can actually engage in a relationship with my grandmother every day. I just need to perceive her at a higher level, and that's what spiritual development is for. So, you know, the more you grow spiritually, the bigger your universe gets, right?
Yes.
You know, atheists are trapped in a material universe, and that's a problem because you can't really explain life from matter alone, because matter cannot organize itself. There always has to be an organizing intelligence. You know, how long would you have to stand next to a pile of rocks before a Rolex jumped out? Or a car, or a toaster oven, or a new knife? Well, infinitely long. And since you got minerals all through your body, something organized your body, which is your soul, which is God. Only God can create a soul. So souls are God manifesting in the divine drama. So the soul is the consciousness within the individual, which is ultimately indistinguishable from God consciousness, because you can't have consciousness of without consciousness itself. Okay, so that brings us to the next point, consciousness. Edward Edinger says consciousness is a psychic substance produced not blindly, but in living awareness of opposites. Why? Because you can't make meaning and be conscious without opposites. What does it mean to be a man if there's no women to juxtapose against the concept? What would north mean without south, east without west, in without out, hot without cold, up without down, left without right? So consciousness requires a duality. Okay? So God as the zero force, if you think of it scientifically, if you look at an electroencephalogram or an oscilloscope, you know what an oscilloscope is for measuring electrical frequencies? God is the zero line. Okay? If you're doing a scientific study and you're looking at the percentage of people that eat a certain food, then, and how their bodies respond, let's say, the line will start at 0 and you'll see these people, X percentage had this favorable of a response, and some people had no response. The point is that in order to have a wave, you have to have a 0 line as a reference point, like an electroencephalogram. So systolic, diastolic, positive, negative, day, night. Consciousness then is actually the product of a duality, without which you can't make meaning. But behind that, excuse me, you have 0. So the way I give this analogy to my students, I say the way you understand God consciousness, there's many ways I could show it to you, but one, I just did one. You have 0 on the oscilloscope, you hook it up to something, and all of a sudden you got a frequency. So now you have a positive and negative, and you can say there's X number of volts, and there's this many amps, because you've got something tangible happening there. That's something you can be conscious of. But if you just stare at the oscilloscope and it just says 0 all the time, there's nothing to be conscious of. There's nothing there. So another analogy I give is I say, okay, let's pretend that you're God and you're the dance floor in a dance hall. Can you visualize that?
Yeah.
Okay. Can anybody walk on you without you knowing it?
No.
Could a mosquito walk on you without you knowing it?
No.
There's nothing you can do on that dance floor without the floor knowing about it. And if you shake the walls, the floor knows about it. If you climb on the roof, the floor knows about it. Why? Because it's all connected. Okay? So, God as 0, no thing, pure potential, the O of love, is aware when anyone desires to dance and wills to dance, because those things produce vibration or frequency, and all of a sudden the dance floor says, I'm dancing. Right? So God is the 0 reference, which is aware of all polarities, emergent from God, which is the act of God looking into itself or dreaming itself into existence. And you can't have existence without the force of the female yin and the male yang, because without those two you can't make meaning, nor can you have form. If you have a plate, then you have something where you say it's on the plate or not on the plate. If you have a cup, you have emptiness, the female, and male, you can hold on to it, right? An atom is emptiness with a little bit of fullness. So right away you see that whenever you have something to be conscious of, it has to have this polarity, or there's no way that God can even know that it's happening. So consciousness has two qualities. There's big C, which is the 0 point, and then there's little c, which is what's dancing.
Yes.
Okay, so because God is in you, the 0 point's already there. But because you're capable of thoughts, feelings, and emotions, you're capable of being conscious of. So the problem in consciousness research is they keep trying to look for, they keep calling consciousness what the person's conscious of. But they forget that behind it is the great witness of it all.
Yes.
So if you go deep enough into meditation,
Yes.
you can find that there's something watching you watching.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
That's God.
Yeah.
And that's what the I really means.
Yeah.
The I is God in you. Okay? Witnessing everything. But it doesn't ever get attached to it. Right? That's the secret. God's not attached to it. To God, it's all just a great show. So God is in the background. If you look at the pyramid, the all-seeing eye, that represents God, but notice it hovers above the pyramid, which is to say it's part of the pyramid, but not part of the pyramid. It's in and not in. It's of, but not of. And that's one of the tricky things about God. But then you had to build the pyramid, right? Somebody had to put it all there. So there you see polarity, potential, work happening, creation happening. So in a nutshell, then what we've just described is that 0 as pure potential is the witness or consciousness itself. Anything that moves between negative and positive, male and female, up and down, left and right, inside, outside, is what 0 is conscious of, and that produces vibration. So anything that you can be conscious of is some kind of a vibration.
Oh, you explained that so well.
That's really the only way it can be.
Can I ask, out of what we've covered so far, what do you find so fascinating about it? Like, what fascinates you with this concept?
Well, oh, by the way, I painted God over there.
I was mesmerized by that for quite some time.
That's the 3 polarities of God in the middle. The black,
Yeah.
the white, and the yellow represent neutral, male and female, however you want to slice it. And then the birds represent souls coming into existence. And the fire represents the celestial fire, the divine fire. A fire has a lot of desire. So you have to feed a fire. So this is God's fire feeding itself with creativity. What's most amazing to me about all this is the same thing that's amazed the Hindu sages for thousands of years. If God is unconditional or is 0, it means everything else has to be a virtual reality. It means this is an illusion, a very powerful illusion. But remember, if you've got infinite processing power, infinite processing speed, infinite information, and infinite energy, you can create any illusion you want to.
So for me, I really appreciate that answer, because immediately, and this has come up for me previously, but you say that again, and the feeling that I get is this easiness that kind of like flows through me. It's like this letting go of this seriousness about everything that's going on, and then doing, especially in the Hindu philosophy of it, we have these massive cycles of how everything is going to go through. Do you know what I mean? We have the birth, and then we have all of this, and then it's destruction.
That's what Om means. A-U-M, ah, means I awaken. U means I'm dreaming. Means I'm falling asleep. Underscore means end of cycle. So everything in creation is being sung into existence by God.
Yes.
And so each out-breath is a universe.
Yeah.
I awaken. Here I am, Shiva. Who's breathing? Shakti. I'm dreaming. What is your dream? Number 1 in my system. I'm falling asleep, which means it's time to move on and have another experience.
And go through again.
Underscore, end of cycle, what's next? So Om is the story of God singing and dreaming itself into existence, and all cycles in existence are nested within Om like a Russian doll. So the flash of a pan of a quantum particle to each of the breaths that you take, I awaken. Pause. I'm dreaming and falling asleep. Underscore. I awaken. I'm dreaming and falling asleep. Rest. Every heartbeat, every single thing in existence is oming. It's just oming and oming and oming and oming away.
Okay, this is brilliant. So that when I get that feeling of ease, and this can be had also through deep meditation, psychedelic journeys, making love to my wife, in many different circumstances where there's that, there's this ease from, personally, I'm speaking from myself, being so serious, like wanting to achieve so many things. And I look back over my life so far of these 36 years, and I'm like, I've achieved these great things and I've worked so hard, but there was so much seriousness. Mm-hmm. And one of my biggest flaws, I believe, that I've had through this is lacking joy, or as much joy that I should have experienced through that process as well. And when we were getting our teas ready before, when we were talking, you said freedom. And for me recently, having a better grasp on what that is. A lot of us say we want to have more freedom as well. And Steiner talks about this in the philosophy of freedom, where it's a case of like, there's freedom, D-O-M, and then there was Freiheit, the H-E-I-T at the ending, where Freiheit was the freedom that we have from an internal aspect, and freedom is the external as well. And I feel like what you're pointing to in your incredible explanations is making this very complex, hard to grasp thing. And I'm like, I feel like I'm getting this understanding, and there's this knowing, and there's this letting go of this seriousness, and there's this internal freedom that's coming about as well. How do you help others or help yourself when it comes to being able to create freedom both from an external source in life, and then the Freiheit, the freedom from the internal, for having that peace and harmony?
Well, these are philosophical riddles that are very, very deep. So, this all boils down at the end of the day to what a person's belief system is, right? This is all here because we actually, we work for God. Like, you are the only you there will ever be. This is, if this goes back to Eros. Did you happen to listen to my podcast with Mark Gaffney recently?
No.
Oh, it's a very good one. But Mark Gaffney gives us the Hebrew conception of Eros, and he says, and Eros, of course, is love.
Yes.
He says Eros always wants to penetrate and create novelty. Penetrate and create novelty. So, for example, porn addiction is not penetrating anything, and it's not creating novelty. But if we love somebody, we penetrate each other, and through that we create novelty. Your future children, let's say,
I've had enough. I've got 4.
Okay, you got 4, but there will never be any of them either.
Yeah.
Just like there will never be another me or you.
Correct.
So you see, in your act of Eros, you penetrated your wife, and together you created novelty. That's what God's all about.
Yes.
Okay? If you, like I have created many, many courses, so I say, okay, I've got to penetrate this issue of the core, because people are lost, and there's a lot of people with back pain. So what I had to do is I had to penetrate all the knowledge I could find and say, okay, if there's this many people running around confused, then there must be something missing in the anatomical or therapeutic or orthopedic or kinesiological viewpoints of the core, right? So I then went into relationship with all the knowledge I could find. I penetrated it and said, okay, where's the parts that these different philosophies or belief systems are missing, right? Physical therapists, let's say they know a lot about the core, but they don't know much about exercise. So they don't, they get you on the table and they teach you how to do a few little contractions, but how do you take an injured rugby player that's been out now for 3 months with a back injury from a stretch band and a pink dumbbell to the scrum? So I said, okay, well, there's a problem there because you're not getting the core ready. You've been doing isolation exercises, but not integration. And then you have to go through flexibility and stability. Then you got to develop strength that's specific. First general, then specific. Then you got to develop power that's specific to the sport. So you see, there's an example of where I penetrated and created novelty.
Yes.
And then you had all this stuff about the core. I could get piles of books out of here talking about the anatomy of the core, but not one of them says a damn thing about the fact that the organs actually control those muscles. So what I had to do is say, look, you guys, if you have a constipation in your colon, you're never going to have normal core function. Why? Because there's inhibitors, there's inhibitory nerve endings that when your colon stretches, it shuts your core down because your pelvic floor is part of your core. So the feeling that you have when you know you got to poop is your pelvic floor relaxing, which is reflexively connected to your transverse abdominis, your internal obliques, and your diaphragm. So the point I'm making is, with one simple example, if you've got an athlete that's constipated and they're lifting heavy weights, they're totally set up for a back injury, okay? So trying to address the core without looking at the person's diet, medical drugs, lifestyle, hydration, etc., is never going to work, okay? So I'm, as a therapist, looking at this going, shit, I'm studying the anatomy of the autonomic nervous system, and I'm looking at all these reflex pathways, and it's completely and utterly dead clear these organs are controlling those muscles. And if these organs are threatened, they will shut down blood supply to the muscles they share a nerve supply with, which means less oxygen, less nutrition, and less waste removal, which is a problem for rehab, okay, and for athletic performance. Why? Because what's more important to your survival is the ability to bring food in, digest, metabolize, assimilate, and eliminate, because without that, your muscles won't make it anyhow. So on a hierarchy of structure, which is what the Chek totem pole shows you, is a hierarchy of control systems, your organs are way higher in the control of the body than the muscles themselves and the joints themselves that make the core. They're the slaves to the organs in this sense, okay? So what did I do? I penetrated and created novelty. Then I penetrated and created novelty. And so ultimately what I did, I'm just using one example, the core, is with Eros, I went into, looked at the available information, looked at all the clinical experience I had, looked at all the cases that wouldn't get better, and said, okay, I've done the right exercise, I've done the right mobilizations, but something's keeping this body inflamed, something's stopping it. So then I had to look at nutritional factors in their diet. What are they eating that's inflaming them? Then I had to look at mental emotional factors. What are their beliefs about why they got hurt, what the pain means, and how to manage it? That can be a limiting factor, right? All I'm trying to show you is that I had to penetrate and create novelty, penetrate and create novelty, penetrate and create novelty. Someone watching porn isn't penetrating anything. So they're just masturbating. And so that's what Gaffney calls pseudo-eros. It's not really love. It's not really penetration, because it's not creating something new. And God is a novelty generator. God always wants to create a new experience, because if you were God and you had everything and you were everything and you had all the time in the world, doing the same thing over and over would just bore you to death. So God, by definition, is a novelty generator. There's not 2 grains of sand on this planet that are identical. There's no 2 flowers that are identical. No 2 people. There's not even 2 bookshelves that are identical. There's not even 2 atoms that are identical. There's nothing that's identical. The closer you scrutinize, the more you realize there's nothing that's the same. If you said, okay, wait a minute, I got the world's best computerized lathe, and I'm cutting bearings to exactly the same dimensions, and I say, I got news for you. Every second that lathe runs, the blade gets duller. And therefore, there's never going to be two bearings the same. And there's a lot of ways you could do it. If you just got a caliper that goes from thousandths of an inch to 10 thousandths of an inch, you'd say, oh, there's a difference between these bearings, or 100 thousandths of an inch. So there's no two things that are alike. And whenever we start doing things repetitiously, we get bored. Right?
So with Eros wanting to penetrate and wanting to create novelty,
Yeah.
I was then thinking about before, as I was very much enjoying going through your library, because let's say how a lot of us would believe that two parallel lines never meet, but in non-Euclidean geometry, two parallel lines meet. And
somewhere.
yeah, well, the North and the South Pole are examples of where parallel lines will meet.
Yeah, if you look at it that way.
Well, that was my brief understanding, because there are no squares, no straight lines in nature, and so the belief system. So, okay, two parallel lines don't meet, but hang on, if I change my belief system, two parallel lines can meet.
Yes.
So then I want to come back to, Paul, how can I reconstruct, change, resynthesize my belief system to then better have me show up in this world?
Well, that always goes. This is why in my system, number one is, what is your dream? Until we're clear what we want to create, we have no way to decide what to create. And if we don't really have a genuine interest or love for what we want to do, we'll never go through the work of making the changes, right? Because once something's programmed into your unconscious, it's like an auto program, and then it takes tremendous conscious effort to witness that programming, right? If somebody's raised with the belief that if you don't take Jesus as your Savior, you're going to burn in hell, but then somebody comes along and shows you that Buddhism is a better way, then the first thing they got to do every time they study Buddha is deal with the fact that there's a voice in their head that says you shouldn't be studying Buddha because you're going to end up going to hell for that. Now, of course that's not true, right? But there you see the disease that's created by being conscious of that idea. So what you've got to do is say, okay, now I've got to watch whenever that belief pops up in my head. I'm going to a Buddhist temple, I'm sitting there, and I hear this little voice in my head saying, you're in the wrong place, and you're studying the wrong material. There's, Steiner would say, the awareness soul says, is it really true? And so then you have to say, okay, well, if God is love and God is the source of everything, then God's also a Buddhist.
Yeah.
And God is also a Muslim, and God is also a Taoist. Right? So you see what happens is, once you're aware that the program belief isn't serving you and isn't really helping you love more, live more, grow more, and experience more, then you now have to take that unconscious belief that you don't even really realize is there until you sit into a Buddhist temple, and all of a sudden you're having this guilt and shame, and you go, where's that coming from?
Yes.
And you say, wow, that's my Christian programming. Is it really true? That's the awareness soul saying, you need to investigate that. So then you go investigate it and you find out it's not true.
Yes.
Okay, so the point is, it's going to take conscious effort. You're going to have to engage that thought every time it comes up. You're going to have to say to that voice inside of you that keeps shaming you, thank you for making me aware that I have a belief that no longer serves me. I'm really enjoying my study of Buddhism. I'm learning and growing. I'm seeing new ways of relating. You open your heart to it, and you fill yourself with the love of your study of Buddhism, which inspires new neural network connections. The more emotion there is, the faster and the stronger the new neural network. And by consciously working with that unconscious thought, which brings it up into consciousness, eventually what happens is the new neural network becomes efficient enough that I love Buddhism doesn't get competition from you're cheating on Jesus, right? This is why so few people evolve, because it takes a real level of commitment, and consciousness is very energy consumptive. Anytime you're cognitively engaged, the brain will use about 80% of the available blood sugar in your body. That's why when people leave tests in school, they're exhausted quite often, because it takes a lot of energy to run your brain. But you see, Jung went on at length, so did Joseph Campbell, and many great psychologists have. People don't want to be conscious because they don't want to do the work nor take the responsibility of having to think for themselves, because the more you actually become conscious, the more you realize it's up to you to change your life, or up to you to participate in the world, or up to you to make things better, instead of just hoping that God will do it or that Jesus will come rescue everybody, like this sort of end of days prophecy. Christ is coming, the sign of, all these are stories, and God loves a good story, right? So the answer to the question, how do I change my life, is you have to identify what it is that you want more than the life you have right now. Or there's not going to be enough inspiration, motivation, love, and energy to make the change, because in order to change from the pattern that any one of us has been living, you have to have enough motivation to rise above it, and enough energy to do the work to reprogram yourself to perceive and believe and act out the person that you choose to be as the dream affirmative new you, right? So if you don't keep investing in that person, then the inertia, one of my quotes is, a dream has the power to overcome the inertia of life. What is life? It's a bunch of habits, right? You've got the habit of breathing, the habit of eating, the habit of shitting, the habit of pissing, the habit of digesting, the habit of sleeping. So when people live a life of repetition, but there's no eros, right? There's no penetration and novelty, then they have to drug themselves to kind of create an alternate reality so that they can get away from what they've created, instead of accepting responsibility for their creations. So you see people escaping flatland by drugging themselves into another existence, which doesn't usually work very well. But if you say, wow, I've done a lot in my life, but there's something that I need that's even more fulfilling, well, then you have to say, well, what would that be? What would really give me that sense of fulfillment? Well, I've already got 4 kids, I've done that. Money, it helps, but there's a lot of rich people that aren't very happy, so we know that no amount of money fixes that.
Can I please use myself as an example now, especially through this chapter of life? So I'm going to be extremely selfish right now and just talk this. So literally have just gone through this thinking process, sold my last company at the end of last year, and my wife and I sat down and we're like, our family unit with these 4 daughters, incredible. I've hit this slump, which honestly I think, which is why I'm doing these interviews and wanting to sit down and have these conversations, because a part of me is like, what do I want? Do I want what I want? And how am I actually best going to figure out what it is that I want to do in this next chapter of my life as well?
Yeah. Well, that's not a job for the head, that's a job for the heart. And the other thing, that's also an exploration, because you see, let's say you say, well, I want to start a school for children.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you don't go spend some time working in a school and looking for schools that share the kind of values that you want to pass on to children, you're never going to know what it's like to be around a bunch of kids all day. And so you're not really that confident that all the time, energy, and money you're going to invest is actually going to bring you to a new place of connection and a feeling of purpose and a feeling of wholeness. So there's always a period of exploration whenever we're in a transition from one way of being to another way of being. So I always encourage people, go spend time, find out, search yourself, what are the things that if you could do them every day would actually make you feel inspired to get out of bed every day, right? Then go explore it for a while. Go spend time in the school. Go spend time surfing or whatever it might be, right? Because then, only then do you actually see if the experience matches the idea in your head.
Yes.
If you just jump at the idea, then oftentimes you find out you were dangerously wrong, because really the idea falls into the category more of a fantasy than it does reality, okay? But each of us comes to the world to serve not only our own evolution, but to contribute to the evolution of others. So ultimately, the heart is the only compass that can navigate these unknown territories, because the heart tunes itself to love, and it also tunes itself to the other souls that are already in a soul contract with you to participate with you through sympathetic resonance is how they find you. And so only when you really spend the time in self-exploration, meditation, and also general exploration to say, what are the things that call to me? You know, where do I get the call? Will you ever know where that next destiny is for yourself? And until you have that sense of heartfelt connection to it, you'll know when it's there, because it just picks you up and moves you. You know, I knew what I was here to do when I was 21. And, you know, I remember the experience of realizing that I had figured it out. It was really like a great weight of insecurity off my back. You know, prior to that, it was like, why am I here? I mean, the world was really like, I was like, wow, all these adults are really lost and they're dangerous and they can't answer my most basic questions. And you got all these people with all these weird religious beliefs. Why? Here I am, a kid in church being told God loves you, but God will burn you in hell if you do anything wrong. I'm like, those two don't go together. I'm sorry. I'm 8 and you believe that, and that makes me nervous because you're driving the car I got to go home in, you know? Yeah, scary, scary stuff. And I was always like, why are people so damn gullible? You know, in my child mind. So the point I'm making is that until I reached the age of 21, I too was wondering, why am I here? You know, so I kept doing the things that I loved to do and the things I had to do to make a living, because I was a father when I was 18. But I always realized that I can't work on a fishing boat much longer, because it doesn't fulfill me.
Yes.
It pays the bills, but it doesn't fulfill me. I've worked as an electrician. It doesn't fulfill me. I've been a mechanic. I was really good at it, but I got tired of just fixing broken shit for people for $15 an hour or whatever. Like, I'm never going to have any freedom at $15 an hour. I'm just going to be able to pay my bills. So you see, then you get to a certain point where you look back on your life and you go, wow, I use my mechanical skills today. I use my electrical skills. I use my plumbing skills. I use my farming skills. I use my understanding of exercise that from all my studies as an athlete. In other words, what you see is all of a sudden, all the dots line up, and you realize that all these explorations actually were getting you pieces of the overall skills you needed to be the person that you came to be, at least at this stage in your life.
Yes.
So everything that you've done till now has something to do with what you're going to do. Because you see, everything builds on itself. So you will find that you need the communication skills you've developed. You will need the understanding of how the body works. You will need the understanding of what it takes to be a father. You will need all these things, and you won't realize it until it's happening. And then there's a convergence, and then that's what I call the golden thread. You realize there's an invisible golden thread, and why that's so important is because that's what the heart compass is following. And it's in the implicate order. There's no physical thread, right? You can't just pull on it like Goldilocks trying to follow the crumbs in the woods or something. You have to feel for it. And love tunes you to it. And if you want real freedom, then you always have to do what you love to do. Because if you do what you think you got to do to please someone else or to make money, then you're not free and you're not using your heart, you're using your head. You're calculating, not being present with feeling your way forward. So, at this stage, from what I'm understanding, is that you should just be in an open exploration. Just say, this deepens your relationship with God and your soul. This is where you say to your soul, what is it that we are here to do, and how can we be in service in a way that is fulfilling to us and adds beauty to the world and helps make the world a better place? I mean, if those are values that are important to you, they're values that are important to me. So I'm just saying how I do it. How can I be of service and support people so that they can ultimately fulfill their own dreams and their own destinies as well? Once you tune your heart or your soul antenna to that, then the magic will start to happen, because then you're actually got your eyes open and your senses open to the clues that are usually all around us, but we don't see them until we're ready to see them. For example, a person in the state you're in walks into a library like mine, and if a book falls out, you're likely to pick it up and look at it. But somebody who's in the state that you're in but isn't really ready to accept responsibility for themselves just sees a book that fell off the shelf and doesn't pay attention to what the title of the book is or how that might be related to their life, and it just becomes an object. You understand these concepts, right?
Yeah.
So
the Gnostic Bible was the one that jumped at me.
Well, that's an interesting one. So when that happens, you might want to look in there and see what the clues are, and just let your inner guide take you to the page that feels like, just like doing tarot. It's not a thinking process. It's an intuitive.
Sorry, this is brilliant, because the last time I was here, we were doing the Zen stone stacking workshop together, and the brilliance of that was at the very start, you were taking us through how do we know which stone to pick up in which order and what to do, and it was tapping into this feeling, this intuition to be able to do it. It was getting out of the head, and I was like, oh my god, it was profound for me to then how I then took that and then applied that to all of the other areas of my life.
That's the same thing you do now, except instead of stones, it's relationships. Because really, what can you do without relationships, right? No man can build anything, or woman, by themselves that's of any significance. It took two to make your children. It takes multiple to have a business. It takes listeners to have a podcast. So you want to tap into the relationship, and the relationship that is most important is between you and your soul, because what is a soul? It's a God in a body, right? This is why in Hinduism they say Atman is Brahman, Brahman is Atman, means soul is God and God is soul. There is really no difference. The difference is that God as God is the soul of all that is. God in man is the soul of that individual expression of God. So it's you are God pretending to be you, right? And forgetting that you created the whole universe just so you could do this, right? And that's the other weird, crazy thing. You see, in metaphor, you created me, so I would be here to teach you the things that you needed to learn that only I could really teach you.
I can pick that up, yeah.
And I must have created you so that there's somebody interested in my message that'll share it with people to help wake them up.
Yes.
And because everything's created outside of time, everything's always created at once. God creates everything at once, which is it's hard for the mind to wrap its head around. But because God is this paradoxical, imperfect perfection, In Buddhism, they use the word dukkha, which means necessary imbalance, because without imbalance, you couldn't have movement. Something that's perfect doesn't move. There's nothing you can do with it. It's dead. So God, as that which is perfect, has to create the illusion of imperfection in order to make life happen. And so the beauty of that is that each of us has enough imperfection that we need each other.
Yeah.
So somehow I'm completing you and you're completing me, and we're all doing that to each other. You know, your wife completes you, your kids complete you. Brothers and sisters are helping complete. We're all here to help complete each other. And what is that? That's God experiencing itself and finding itself and exploring itself, because without that, God can't know itself. Without love, God cannot become conscious of itself. Which brings up another point. The definition I created for one of the definitions for love is the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self and or other. So love is the flow of energy and information, because that's all there is.
Yes.
Everything's energy and information. There is nothing else. Through empathic, meaning I feel. Compassionate, I understand. Connection to self, I feel and seek to understand myself. That's love. Or other. So love is the flow of energy and information by connecting to and seeking to understand the other. Okay? Juxtapose that with mind is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. Embodied and relational. Love, embodied and relational. The flow of energy and information. Love is the flow of energy and information through empathic connection to self or other. So what you see is that you can't have mind without love. Because what is love? An embodied and relational process where there's a flow of energy and information. The difference is mind itself doesn't need empathy and compassion. A computer doesn't have to have empathy and compassion. You can use a computer to kill people or to support them. But love has empathy and compassion. But within God, everything is God's love. And God has empathy and compassion for itself. So the paradox of it is, love is the very basis of relationship, and you can't have a mind without relationship. So if there was no love, there could be no mind.
Yes.
And if there was no mind, there'd be no way to be aware that love is being shared.
Yes.
So love and mind are like two sides of a coin. And God's stuck right in the middle.
Intriguing thing that you've learned so far
In my life or in the writing process?
in the writing of these books?
That I get myself into very big projects that take a lot of time and money. I think for me, the most intriguing, well,
Or the lesson?
I wouldn't say it's a lesson for me. I think that what's driving me is I see all the problems in the world and how people get themselves into so much trouble, and the danger of belief systems, and how people are so quick to want to just remain unconscious without realizing that makes them totally and utterly susceptible and controllable, and how most of this brainwashing starts in childhood with religious ideas. And it's not that I'm against religion, I'm just against the abuse of religion, you know? So I think for me, the most intriguing thing is seeing how rapidly COVID brought the world into a state of obvious degeneration. Like you could really see how gullible people were and how lost they are, and how they're not being taught to think for themselves, and how quick they are to give up their sovereignty and just follow people like a sheep. And I'm 61. I've lived a really full life. I've spent a lot of my life really trying to deeply understand God. I did Tai Chi every day for 18 years. I've meditated for years and years and years. I started meditating when I was 12, and my mother took me into the Self-Realization Fellowship. I think the most important thing is that I want to help people understand that God always says yes. Unconditional love, by definition, cannot create conditions. So God is a perpetual yes. Therefore, when you understand the power that's invested in you through love and mind, you realize that you can create anything you want to if you put your heart into it. And when you realize that the answer is always yes, it's not God limiting you, it's yourself. And if you want more joy in your life, then create it. If you want more money, then create it. If you want to heal, then work on it. So I think for me, the greatest, I've been writing this day and night for 3 years now. I think the greatest, for me, the greatest the reason for it is because I know what I want my kids to know. So really I've written down everything I want to make sure my kids know so they don't get unnecessarily tricked, beat up, or lost in life. And now these are deep books. These are not like light reading. This is for people that are really honestly interested in really experiencing life to the fullest and not being lazy about using their mind and waiting for someone to rescue them. And, it's for people that are really ready to take on an adult spiritual relationship. My point is my kids wouldn't be able to read these books probably for many years. But I am going to write a beginner's guide that will synthesize it down to kids' level. But if my kids need to learn that, so do yours. So does everyone's kids. And when I see what's being put into children's minds and bodies, it's just devastating. If you want to, Osho says children are born God and the parents beat it out of them. And when you see what's happening, God is born every day, and parents and society just squeeze it right out of them with beliefs, with confirmation. What we're seeing right now with the World Economic Forum and all this shit is they're trying to eliminate God, soul, religion, and all that. Why? Because you're just a hackable animal. They're trying to actually take us back to the Stone Ages and turn us all into plants in a plantation that they can control by flipping on a light switch and changing the temperature or adding more or less water, and it's dangerous as hell. But that's the negative polarity that comes to put us in a situation to give us the opportunity to overcome our own resistance to growth. Right? If someone's threatening to take your sovereignty away, you got a choice. Stand up for it or to lose it. And so watching and being a therapist for like just about 40 years now, 39 years, and seeing how people get themselves in trouble, I just felt I couldn't leave the world without leaving what I've learned behind on these issues, because it would be painful as hell to have to watch how many people are making mistakes because they didn't have somebody that cared enough to share what they'd learned in their life with them. So I think that's it. The thing that just keeps me going is I feel like I've got to share what I've learned, but there's something very deep in my books, and this is what it begins with. I'm in the very beginning, I let them know that this is Spirit Gym. And in Spirit Gym, we all have our unique perspective. And that becomes your reality. So if you want to talk about reality, reality is what you believe. Okay? So I make the point that this series of books is what I've learned through my explorations of God, love, and reality. But you don't need to agree with me, because each of us has our own Spirit Gym. So Spirit Gym is like an infinite gymnasium full of gymnasiums. And if you don't believe in quantum physics, that's okay. Then whatever you believe in, that's what creates the resistance for your spiritual growth. If you don't believe in my ideas about God, then you've just identified the God part that gives you resistance in your Spirit Gym. You see the point I'm making? Even though I'm sharing what I've come to believe, every single chapter is an invitation to say, what do you believe? And you better become aware of it. Because if you're not aware of these 11 things, starting with myth, you're probably in somebody else's Spirit Gym under their control. You're probably going to get to the point where you really don't like it. And it doesn't even matter if you agree with me, because by disagreeing with me, you are identifying the equipment that you have put into Spirit Gym, consciously or unconsciously, or allowed to be put in there by other people. So you see the point I'm making. The point is that the book is not a statement about what's right. It's a statement about what I've learned and what I've come to believe through trial, error, and practice. But it's saying there's these principles and they create your reality. And God's processing power is enough that you can have completely opposite beliefs to me and still share in a conversation and share the same world. You could have no belief in God. You see what I'm saying? Like, look around the world. You got Richard Dawkins, who's a staunch atheist, who hates religion, who bashes religion with the same fervor they bash themselves. You got Stephen Hawking, who was one of the best physicists in the world, who figured out that the universe came from zero and said, see, there's no need for God. And I'm like, oh my God, here's the smartest guy in the world. One of the smartest guys in the world just found God and didn't even see it. And so you see, that's the power of an infinite processing consciousness that can create infinite realities and run them in parallel and be all of them at once. And the answer is always yes. So my series of books is really less about what I found and more of an invitation to say, this is what I found. And oh, by the way, I spent my whole life researching this. So if I'm talking about diet, and I'm talking about the core, and I'm talking about exercise, and I'm talking about thinking, you might want to look at what I've left behind before you just write it off. And to the degree that you disagree, that's perfect. Just make sure you're aware of why you're disagreeing and what it is that you believe, because the word believe, you could say, means be live. Be-live. Your belief is what you are empowering in your own show.
Dare I ask, when are these books going to come out?
We're shooting to have the volume 1 out by the end of May, possibly early June.
Incredible.
If possible. I'm trying to finish this next 2 chapters because I'm at the end then of a section.
Yep.
And my editors now just finished chapter 20. So that gives us enough to make the first 2 volumes.
Okay.
So what we'll do is we'll edit, give them to the layout people,
Yes.
and then it'll go through layout and finally into publication.
Yes.
And we'll put it out on Kindle first, because this is going to be an expensive set of books. The art is very expensive. I put a lot of money into a great artist. There's right now somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 original pieces of art and original diagrams that I did. It's going to be very high-end production, glossy paper, beautiful art. Like I took the best of all my best books in my library and merged them all into one book. So I designed the book so you don't even have to read it. If you just look at the art and look at the diagrams, it's going to affect you at an unconscious level. So you can use it like a coffee table book, sitting in a coffee shop just to look at it and go, wow, this is wild. What is all
It's
this?
almost like through osmosis, it's
Yeah.
just being there.
Yeah, it's acting on your unconscious mind
Incredible.
to open you.
Yeah.
So I did it so that there's something in there for everybody, even if it's just looking at the pictures.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's basically a synthesis of everything I've learned in my whole life. It's my magnum opus. The problem is to really write what I want to write, I'd need about 3,000 more pages in another 5 years. So I'm trying to synthesize it the best I can. But I'm really excited. I think, my reviewers are some very smart people, and the most common feedback I've gotten from the reviewers is, Paul, this is changing the entire way I look at life.
Wow.
I'm able to see and experience and understand far more than I ever have. And a lot of these people reviewing this are my most advanced students and people with medical degrees and, all sorts of very, very knowledgeable people. I mean, I didn't hand it to a bunch of school children. I handed it to people that could really critique it and try to tear it apart. And so it's fun.
Do you know where someone can get access and to be able to buy the books when it comes out, or is it best for me to just ensure that all the links are updated when it does come out?
Well, anybody that's on any of my mailing lists, like the Chek Institute, will be notified.
Great.
I don't think Penny has the first web page up for it yet because we're still building the website, and I'm building a membership program as well. So I'm going to actually have a membership program, and each week I'll give a 1-hour presentation, and then I'll do 60 to 90 minutes so that the members can bring me the problems that they're having in their life.
Incredible.
And we will use the principles of Spirit Gym to solve their problems so that everyone gets to learn from everybody else and learn how to apply that system of problem solving and creativity and manifestation in their life. So I'm trying my very best to create a new education system that's truly based on the principles of spirituality so that anyone can learn the model and then go out into the world and practice it and share it with people. Because I think if we don't all do our best to get clear on what we want to create now, then we're in the hands of the people that are going to continue to see us as guinea pigs and profitable little animals to cage up, and we'll continue to go through what you guys went through in Australia on a much bigger scale, and they're certainly working hard at it. So I'm their antichrist, one of them.
Good.
I'm saying, look, if you learn how to use your mind and you learn how to understand what love is and you learn how to create what you want, you're uncontrollable. That's why they don't want people believing in God or the soul, because when you have deep connection to God or soul, you're not afraid to die, because God can't die. And if God is God, then you can't be anything else. So the idea of death is the scariest thing for people, but it's also the thing that makes them the most easy to control. So part of what I'm doing is helping your people really understand what God is and what soul is and what life's all about and what happens when you actually die and where you go and all this stuff, so that they can say, well, shit, I'm not going to let people control my life. I'm going to maintain my sovereignty, and if I die doing it, at least I die a hero instead of a cop-out. I think that's the only thing we can do right now. We either have to wake up, as Ken Wilber says, wake up, clean up, grow up, and show up, or we're all in prison.
Thank you so much for today, Paul. I appreciate this immensely beyond words. Thank
Thanks.
you. The work it's affected me since I was 18 till now, and it's going to continue, so I'm really looking forward to being able to dive into more. So thank you for this. Your time and attention today has just been remarkable, and thank you for allowing me in your home.
I'm sorry that, I was moving around a bit on some of these questions,
That's
but the
great.
problem is they're so deep
Yeah.
that without a structure, normally I would say, this is what consciousness is, what God allowed to have a structure to it, but you kind of hit me with three very complex questions, so I tried to weave them all together. And I think anyone listening, at least the first time through, the best thing to do is not try to figure it out, just to be present with it.
Yes.
And if you listen a second time, then listen as a student. The first time, I think it's best to just listen, to just feel what's coming across, and not really try to get caught, or you'll miss what I'm saying. But then as you listen, it'll get deeper and deeper inside of you, and you'll be able to actually take it in chunks and start to, the best thing to do is say, do I see this in my life?
Yeah.
Right? And if God was God, then what would God be like?
Yeah.
Or is God an old man in the sky with a bad attitude?
I don't believe so anymore.
And the problem is I always crack up. Everybody keeps calling God a he. I'm like, I have never seen a man give birth to anything but a good poop. And the universe is not a big poop. So God is probably a lot more feminine than masculine. And since God also is the woman that gives birth to everything, there must be the man. That makes God androgynous, which means God is something very unusual that we're not used to dealing with. And that's part of what I'm trying to say is, if you really want to explore God, you got to be ready to have your mind blown. Because quite frankly, you can't know God with a mind. 10 grams of mushrooms might get you there. But, if you're not ready for that, then you'll just be so scared to death that you'll think you met the devil instead of God.
Thank you, Paul.